clearly behind the fence. L, K and J were the walkways with the graves and there's signs saying Japanese not.
That's right.
That, yeah. And on the other one, D1 was as you come along the circular bit at the top was the area with the trees.
That's right.
Up the top
there.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Because we seem to have some confusion here about exactly where it was.
Yeah, that's the bit that's been protected. The meadow. Is this.
Okay, so would we like to ask the Save Southwark Woods representatives to come forward? Okay, and if you'd also like to introduce yourselves and just say a few words in similar fashion.
Yeah, I'm Blanche Cameron and I'm part of the Save Southwark Woods community organisation. We are fully constituted and we have nearly 10,000 supporters.
And my name is Louis Schaefer, and I'm a migrant to this country. And like many migrants, I love this country more than some people who've been living here for many years.
Hi, I'm Ian Blaney. I'm a local resident in Peckham Ward. So I walk through the cemeteries regularly, and that's why I'm involved.
Okay, and similarly, if you'd like to say a few words, and then we'll move on to questions.
Okay, we have a short presentation to make. Thank you very much for inviting us to speak to you this evening. This has been a long, drawn-out process. This is not a planning application meeting, it's a scrutiny committee, and we're here to look at the legal issues and the basis on which we challenge the burial strategy that Southwark Council has developed. And we really appreciate the time that you're going to take to look at that, and we really do genuinely appreciate that. The Council hasn't done all the work necessary to make this strategy legitimate, and what we're going to point out in our presentation are the areas that are missing and which could be leaving the Council open to challenge and risk. Okay, so this is as much for your benefit as for ours. The Southwark burial strategy proposes to clear and fell over 10 acres of Grade 1 sink woodlands and excavate or mound over thousands of graves at the cemeteries for as little as 10 years of burial provision, at a cost of well over to £5.2 million, with burial for only some faiths. Here's why the burial strategy is seriously flawed. There has been no public consultation. The 4-year-old public consultation from 2011-2012 is not relevant, as these are entirely new proposals, covering different areas of the cemeteries. The old consultation focused on a completely different site, Honour Oak Recreation Ground, in Camberwell New Cemetery, and not the wooded areas of Camberwell New and Old Cemetery. Even though some information was in there on that, it focused on the Honour Oak Rec as the main solution to burial provision. There were no detailed plans for Area D or Area Z. There was no mention in the survey of trees or the loss of Grade 1 sink woodland. So you're asking people whether they want to continue burial without saying what it would cost them. These are completely new proposals. There's insufficient financial information and analysis. This burial strategy is not good value for money. And we've heard earlier in this meeting how strapped the council is for cash. You cannot waste public money. You need to spend it on services. We are not anti-burial. We are pro-burial. But we are not for wasting public money. And the financial information is completely insufficient. In 2011, the cost estimate was £5.2 million for the burial strategy. That was in 2011. No costings have been given since then for updated proposals. We now have in front of us detailed proposals that are going to the planning committee. Why not cost them and say what that is going to cost? Area Z costings have ballooned to 1.3 million, as was pointed out, which is equivalent to a taxpayer subsidy of £1,700 on each burial plot in that area.
Where would it go up from? It went up from
250,000 to 1.3 million. In addition, other costings are missing. There are no detailed costings of the excavation of thousands of graves in accordance with Church Commissioner guidelines. In a similar case in 2014, excavating 1,200 graves was estimated by Church Commissioners to cost approximately 3.1 million. How many thousands of graves are proposed for reuse? Have you costed it? No. There's no assessment, such as a Cabot survey, of the existing value of these 10 acres of wild woods to ecological, social and financial benefit. We've seen at the Haygate estate, when the community valued the trees, what came out was an annual value of millions of pounds to Southwark of those woods. These woods, the community has started to map, and we have made an approximate estimation of these woods of 22 million a year to the council in value from free services. Those are mental and physical health services, air quality, groundwater filtering, and so on. There are no cost comparisons with healthier, cheaper and fairer options, longer term solutions proposed by Save Southwark Woods, which means you are breaking your value for money commitment. You have not done any cost comparison with what might be fairer and cheaper alternatives that would provide burial for all faiths. And you have refused to comply with Southwark's Cabinet decision of 2012 in June and explore thoroughly out-of-borough burial options. We have proposed that, exploring with Kemnal Park and looking together with them at figures, spending 5.2 million, which you currently estimate, which is going to be more than, could buy over 20 years of burial, and that the revenue generated from sale plots in that area could be reinvested in further burial land provision or into other services. You have admitted the 5.2 million will not be recouped. You are basically not carrying out your due diligence in regard to finances. And these plans do not serve all faiths. There's been insufficient equalities impact assessment, contrary to Southwark's own policies and national and international law on equality and discrimination. Southwark policy states it aims to provide burial for all Southwark residents who seek it, but that's not true, and you don't even do it at the moment. That's on your website. Nunhead Cemetery has a small area for Turkish Muslim burial. There is no provision for Southwark residents of Orthodox Jewish or Muslim faiths who require burial. Southwark's burial strategy continues this discrimination, as there is no provision within the burial strategy for other faiths of these kinds. As taxpayers, these Southwark residents are expected to help subsidise the cost of burial for other faiths while paying privately for their own. If implemented, the burial strategy will embed this religious discrimination long term. There will be a serious impact on public health, which has not been sufficiently surveyed. Trees and woodland are ecosystems essential to public health. Understanding of this has accelerated in the 5 years since the 2011 consultation. Reducing tree cover for London goes against the London Plan and Southwark's own strategies regarding air pollution and air quality, the Vision 2020 in the London Plan, and Boris Johnson, Mayor of London's own policies at the moment to increase tree cover to 25% by 2020. How are you going to do that when you are reducing 9/10 of these woods? Development for new burial is covered by strict controls under EU and national legislation, particularly in sensitive groundwater conditions and collection zones such as these, SPZs. Camberwell New Cemetery is SPZ2 and Camberwell Old Cemetery, Area Z, is an SPZ1, which means it is collected directly for groundwater, for drinking water eventually. Okay? It is illegal to bury bodies in standing water, but last winter, new burial plots in the old cemetery stood flooded for weeks with contaminated surface water overflowing onto the public highway. We challenge the council's conditions even provided at the moment to provide safe burial and safe public health for the residents around these cemeteries. Area Z is at the bottom of a steep slope and will be gathering spring water, and there are springs under Camberwell Old Cemetery, which is why it was available to sell as a cemetery in the first place, in fact. Key information is missing regarding impacts on public health. No detailed work has been carried out directly with the Environment Agency to assess potential groundwater contamination and flood risks. Only superficial documents provided by consultants with inadequate information. Council should be working directly with the Environment Agency officers on these issues. These are serious public health issues. There's been no health impact assessment. There's been no environmental impact assessment. Even someone changing the gate in their fence has to provide an environmental impact assessment, and you haven't carried one out on any of these plans. Environmental impact assessment is under DEFRA law and Southwark guidance would assess the groundwater contamination and pollution from burials, flood risk from the removal of woods and undergrowth, air pollution from the loss of woods and undergrowth. This is an air quality management area. Southwark has terrible air pollution. Removing woods is criminal. Air, noise and water pollution from construction proposals And the excavation and removing, as Tom said, processing thousands of tonnes of material, not just on-site, but also off-site, resulting in a current application which is applying for up to 25 truckloads a day. That is 50 truck journeys to and from these sites. That is months of moving in 20-tonne trucks. You do the maths. So, hence no environmental impact assessment, clearly. There have been no cost comparisons with natural capping remediation only of Area Z. You do not have to put graves in Area Z. As we've said, the costs are huge. You could cap it naturally to deal with this so-called toxic substance. You carried out 60 or 50 trial pits.
Say it's not toxic. It's not toxic.
It's not toxic.
It's toxic and contaminated are two different things, and you just can't use
That's
those
right.
terms.
I think that
that
is extremely misleading, Gavin. And the trial pits that you carried out, only one trial pit found any kind of major contamination
out of
at all.
60.
And DEFRA's guidance and the Clare contaminated land guidance, in line with that, you could carry out natural capping at a fraction of the cost, okay, and still have millions. It would be, less than £500,000. You're looking at 1.3 million at the moment. Might be as little as £200,000, but you haven't done a cost comparison. You don't know what you're spending your money on. There has been no traffic burden or road safety risk assessment for pedestrians, cyclists, schools and other road users from months of construction and site vehicle access. And we know that in Southwark has a very bad situation with road users and early deaths from traffic accidents.
And the people who
very
use the
sadly.
cemetery after it's...
Also by increasing road traffic and so on to it. There's been an insufficient assessment of ecological value. These are Grade 1 sink wildlife woodlands, and they are part of an ecological network and part of the London Green Grid as covered under the GLA and London Plan. They are extremely important to London. It is an ecological network for wildlife, and it is a health network for us. This is our natural health service. These woods have ancient and veteran trees, and we have been mapping these with the Woodland Trust. We have found there is potentially an ancient hedgerow, and you are preparing to cut down its entire setting. And there are veteran trees, veteran hawthorns and veteran oaks and so on. Tree preservation orders, however, have been varied without community consultation and involvement, contrary to Southwark's own woodland management plan for the cemeteries, which says the woodland management plan has never been applied by Southwark. It says you must involve the community in the management.
Just a minute or so now.
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
Hundreds of trees are missing from the plans, and that's why we've been mapping them as a community. There's incomplete habitat, plant, bird, mammal surveys and so on. There's been no survey of the loss of social amenity. Southwark applied to register the cemeteries as part of the Green Chain Walk in 2012 and made a huge statement about how important they were socially and environmentally, not as cemetery use. There has been no survey of community use of these woods, and they're very important for mental and physical health reasons. There is no, this is my final point, Gavin, there is no respect for heritage or history in this burial strategy. This is the story of our community in the landscape. The burial strategy proposes to destroy these rare landscape character features for London, contrary to London Plan guidance on conservation and heritage and Southwark's own guidance on conservation and heritage, and Southwark's own cemeteries conservation plan. There has been no visual or written information on how plans will destroy the rare landscape character features, and these are, just to reiterate, the virgin wooded hilltop. That is a rare landscape character, and that comes under conservation in the London Plan. It is on One Tree Hill, a nature reserve, part of the Great North Wood. The fact that a fence divides it from the Great North Wood has got nothing to do with whether it's a cemetery or not. It is ancient woodland. And the veteran trees and the ancient hedgerow in the old cemetery, Woodland Trust are jumping up and down about finding a wild pear, could be a champion tree for London. These are old woods, okay? And a rare landscape character conservation issue means that you have to conserve the setting, not just trees or individual groups of trees, Gavin. Sorry. These woods also record 150 years of social history of London's poor working class.
But that's not going to affect them. They're not interested in the poor.
Oh, that's right. No, okay.
Okay,
There's
you
no
said that you're on your last point. Are you on your last point, or is your last point but one?
Heritage and history, Gavin.
Okay, so is this your last point now?
There's been no consultation with the descendants of the dead who are buried in these cemeteries. There has been no plan for respectful care, conservation and maintenance of the gravestones. Contrary to Southwark Cemetery Conservation Management Plan, you are proposing to remove them and dig them up. There's
Tom.
been no plan for respectful treatment.
Okay, I'm going to draw you
of
to
the
a close
remains of
there,
the dead.
Blanche.
Okay, my
Tom.
final statement.
Well, no, I'm going to draw you to a close there.
Okay.
Tom, first question.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I want to ask the right questions to the Cabinet member when we get the chance. You've given us a lot of information there.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify some of that.
Sure.
I've read a great deal of what you've written. I've been to the cemeteries. I've read at length the transcript of your meeting here at the council. From that, so the last people we heard from were talking about reusing graves, but from the meeting you had with Darren and Peter,
Yeah.
am I to understand that you're opposed to using the cemetery for any more burials at all?
Yes.
People,
I'll tell you why under the burial
Just one at a time.
burial strategy.
Yeah.
You don't have the money to do both. You cannot do reuse and provide burial for all faiths. And at the moment, you're breaking your own legislation,
No.
etc. So
Hang on.
reuse
Stick to
of
the
graves.
question.
I am sticking to the question. We are different from various representatives. There are more representatives on the stakeholder group. No, we are entirely against reuse of graves.
Gavin, am I
Okay.
able to ask a few?
Yeah, go
to
for it, yeah,
clarify
yeah.
some points. Yeah. So in terms of figures, there was a lot of figures thrown out there that I'll be asking Darren about. So 10 acres, burials for 10 years, and 5.2 million in cost. They were all numbers that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And are those figures that are coming from the council, or are these figures that you
No.
come to? They're not.
We've measured the areas of JKL, the areas of the old woodland walks, and we've also measured the area of what you call Area Z, which is also part of the Grade 1 sink woodland, by the way. Area Z is not just overgrown, it is part of the Grade 1 sink woodland.
Could you tell me a bit more about community value? There's a figure on that. I'm very interested in how you come to it. It sounds, you see, because what I heard was that people were putting numbers on what the value was to them, and that doesn't sound very scientific. So I was wondering if you could just break it down.
Okay, do you mean the Cabot survey, for example?
Well, you talked about was it 22 million a year?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the way that in modern circles woods and trees are valued is to look at how much it would cost the council to replace the services currently provided for free by those woods. So if you want to really assess your assets and check that you're not destroying them, you do a Cabot survey. And Cabot stands for Capital Asset Value of Amenity Trees, and it's what was carried out at the Haygate, but also in other areas all over the country. You could do an iTree assessment if you wanted to. And there are various assessments for it, but it will tell you how much it would cost to replace the health services, the air filtering, the social and mental health benefits and so on from those woods. Yes, it's a kind of a guesstimation, but there's a lot of research into it, and it's used widely by councils. Okay. It hasn't been carried out. It's a really simple thing to do.
Okay. Tom, any more?
Just one more. It was more really a question for yourselves, but also for us as a committee, which was that if we are, as you say, in breach in terms of our responsibilities to faith communities, is there any possibility of, should we be using these sites, of using also Muslim and Orthodox Jewish burials, or is that something that wouldn't be able to, but that's something I'll ask the Cabinet.
Can I just briefly respond to that? They can't, Orthodox Muslim and Jewish burial cannot take place over another body, so reused graves can't apply. Also, they have separate areas. And, you know, we're just mentioning Orthodox Jewish and Muslim faiths. There may be other faiths also that the council is not supplying. However, if you were to invest in multi-faith burial provision at Kemnal Park, you could choose areas within that large, beautiful park that everybody could be buried in for much less money, with revenue generated. You will save yourselves money. Okay.
Okay, so I've got Johnson.
Tom's taken. Tom beat me to it on one of the questions, but following on from another of Tom's questions, which was, could you, just a personal question, could you appreciate residents of the borough that would like to bury loved ones within the borough?
I can appreciate that people want to bury loved ones.
Yeah.
I think burial I mean, not I think, burial is a Southwark-wide issue. This is a borough-wide issue. And the money that you're proposing to spend, the loss of the woodlands and so on, is a borough-wide issue. So all people's needs should be taken into account. So I think the compromise, what we believe is a compromise, is a borough does not have to provide burial at all. Okay, we're not suggesting that. Okay, but there's no obligation under law for a borough to. You could stop tomorrow and continue running the crematorium, which makes a profit, which actually subsidises the cemeteries at the moment anyway. So from no borough burial, from no burial at all, to cutting down woodland, to providing burial but preserving woodland makes total sense. And the council could save money by putting on a shuttle bus. They could still save money, millions of pounds of money, because you're writing off.
Paying a taxi cab for that.
You could even pay a taxi cab from the station if you wanted to, but Kenmore Park has offered to look at putting on a shuttle bus from the station there. Southwark could put on shuttle buses and still save money, because you're deciding to write off 5.2 million with this burial strategy and never recoup it. So that, do you see what I mean? So you invest the money in that. As I say, we're pro-burial, and there are communities within Southwark who are not being provided for and yet are being taxed to provide for other people's burial provision. So we're going to have to find some compromise here where everybody who wants to be buried gets buried, sure. But, you know, this isn't local burial for local people. You know, it's burial for everybody, surely. And that's, you know, that's what everybody, I think, believes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And, you know, it's been a long campaign, and you know you've obviously done some amazing work on it, and you know the sincerity comes across. But it does worry me, you know, that you've come up with some suggested compromises, but you know even the campaign, you know, have got different positions. Do you see what I mean? So
No,
I just
No, the campaign hasn't.
all right, no, I'm just
Sorry.
Hang on,
Hang
on,
Anyway,
Lewis. Let Jasmine finish her question, and then you
okay.
can.
I mean, personally, as someone, you know, as someone that's lost quite a lot of family members, you know, I think it's an absolute right to bury your dead, and you know, I think it's a right to bury them quite near. You know, I've had this discussion with you before. You know, it's about bereavement. You know, and cemeteries aren't just about burying dead; it's where you take your grief. So, you know, I'm uncomfortable about being a local councillor and denying my constituents that very right. You know, so you have to. You know, I think sometimes you don't look at it from other people's perspectives. Now, in order to, you know, I really want us to work with you in terms of compromise, but there are a number of things, you know, that we are looking at to maintain the biodiversity. But you don't seem to, you haven't said anything of that in your presentation. You know, there are ways you can have cemeteries nowadays, and you can use, you know, sandstone. You know, you can use plaques, you can have trees instead of heads. So please let me finish, because otherwise, you know, I've meetings every night, so, you know, just bear with it. You know, so I just think, sorry, I've lost my
we'll go to a question.
We'll get to the point, so that we can actually have some compromise now, because it's been a long campaign. You know, you're here now, you're at Scrutiny, so what I would ask you to do is don't squander this opportunity. Enter in to, you know, the kind of dialogue where we can, you know, basically work together on this, and that's what I would ask. It's not, you know, beyond you to do that, because you've run this amazing campaign, but we have to have some compromise here, and I think you have to appreciate that as councillors, you know, it's not really an option to tell people that they haven't got a right to bury their dead. And the idea, you know, I don't think we're thinking straight, the idea that you're putting taxes on for people, you know, to take them where? To see, you know, you've already realised we're strapped for cash. No one uses taxes in this building, I can assure you.
Okay.
Can we answer that question? This is a scrutiny meeting. This is about the safety of Southwark Council. This is, I mean, plans are one thing, but this is, we've got a lawyer here, and at the end of the day, are you going to leave yourself open to being accused of not doing the due diligence that you needed to do? Okay? These are all interesting questions, and they're good questions, and we feel for people who have different opinions. Okay, but Save Southwark Woods has made a presentation here which says that this council has not done the necessary things that it needed to do. It has not had a consultation. If you do not have a consultation, how do you know how to proceed? Okay, the financials do not work here. It is so expensive. It doesn't fit for Jewish or Muslim Orthodox burials. Okay. The environmental costs have not been checked. Okay? That you haven't done these people have not done the work necessary to bring this through. Now, this is not for us to, there's no compromise on our part. The only question is whether you are willing to put Southwark at risk. Because if you go ahead with this, which you probably will, you will put Southwark at risk.
Let me ask you about one of the things you've said there, which is that there's no compromise on our part. And as Jasmine says, and I think that seems to be part of the problem in terms of your own attitude towards this process is that you're I mean, you know, the reason we've got two sets of people here tonight. I mean, you know, Tom was at the stakeholders. And he came along to the council assembly meeting when you were there as well. And we don't agree on everything, as you can already tell from this evening. But it seems to me, by engaging in the stakeholder group, that was the right thing to do, because you know that voice is then being heard. Now, excuse me? Well, I'm going to ask you about it now. What has been your involvement with the stakeholder group?
We told you at the beginning that we would not involve ourselves with a committee whose remit was to promote the plans and fiddle with them around the edges. All you've done is fiddle with them around the edges.
But if you've not engaged with that body,
this is irrelevant.
Hang on. Let me finish.
Gavin, do your job.
Let me finish. If you're not prepared to engage with a body that is set up to hear people's views and try and accommodate some people's views, it's a bit strange to then turn around and say we're not being listened to, because you're not allowing the council to listen to us.
I'll answer that. Okay. It's very interesting that is the point that you want to discuss, Gavin.
Well,
because
one of the points I want to discuss.
Okay, no, because it's the first point that you've raised is trying to undermine the rightness of Save Southwark Woods campaign to have anything to do with
I'm interested in how representative you really are of the views of local people. Yes.
We have
1,000 of your ward members, ward residents.
Yeah,
1,000.
And 3,500 from Southwark.
From Southwark. 1,000. And they haven't all been fooled. Okay?
No.
And let me tell you something, Gavin.
Yeah.
Gavin, you, okay, I'm not talking about you. We're saying...
Sounds like you're talking about me.
Well, we are talking about you.
Can you just
you're
wait a second?
Because you're our local guy.
Yeah.
Okay? We relied on you, at least not to attack us. But our situation is very simple.
Yeah.
We are tree and monument people.
Yeah.
We love the heritage.
Yeah.
We are not in favor of cutting
Yeah.
down a tree. We are not in favor of digging up somebody else's tombstone so that someone else can be buried, so that's 50 years later.
Lewis, my appeal to you is to listen to the views of other people who don't necessarily agree with you, who feel just as strongly and have just as strong a sense of moral righteousness as you're very keen on pointing out to other people. You know, and I think that engaging in a stakeholder group is one way of doing that. I think it's a perfectly legitimate point to make, to ask, why haven't you engaged in that process?
Right. Tom stated in his response to that the stakeholder group had not listened and that there was a poor reaction. You didn't even present the detailed information that was requested by stakeholder group, and it has shown to be a complete joke. That stakeholder group is a pretense at public engagement for 6 months when you knew you couldn't touch the woods anyway because it was the bird nesting season. You decided to run a pretend public engagement process. You have done nothing to change the plans except to remove a few fewer trees, etc. They are essentially exactly the same plans and you're talking about the planning application process here, Gavin. That's what I find so interesting, because this has been working.
Well, I asked the legal officer to clarify.
We have presented on the burial strategy. Can we return to the burial strategy,
and the
please?
Scrutiny, which is your job.
I've got a news indicating to ask the next question.
Right. So we have put forward issues.
Well, I'm asking Anu to ask a question.
Thanks, Gavin. I think we are here to scrutinise the council and their plan as well, so I hope we do get a chance to do that. I think also residents are entitled, if they feel like something's been set up to try and get plans through, not to do that and to run a campaign in their own way. And I think, you know, people should be allowed to speak however they want. Certainly, I think that is a liberal.
Nobody would deny that.
Well, I think people are being criticised a bit
unfairly.
Well,
people have a right to ask questions as well.
Yeah, I just think
not here to scrutinise the campaign.
That wasn't the point I was going to. That wasn't the point I was going to make. What I was going to say is, I think one of the difficulties about your point and Jasmine's point about, you know, there are people who want to be buried I think they haven't been consulted particularly either, and I think we're in a situation where the 2011 consultation didn't happen well. It was about the wreck rather than this. It mentioned the word tree once, as we know. So I think the danger of sort of asking for compromises, we haven't actually engaged everyone fully to think about what that compromise and what people who want burial, actually how far they would be prepared to travel, because for residents of my ward, this is actually a long way away. This is almost another borough to them, and they don't get somewhere in Riverside ward to bury people. So actually, I think there is something about engaging with people. I accept there are people who want to be buried in the borough, but actually I'd like to have a conversation. And if you remember Lucy Cope, who came to Council Assembly, she hadn't been consulted and she hadn't heard about the plans at all, and she had lost 2 sons very tragically. So I think we need to step back and think about consultation and compromise, and not put all the pressure on some people who care very passionately about nature and trees, but actually broaden that. And I suppose trying to ask some objective questions, I'm interested in what conversations you've had about other boroughs and compromises that they've been able to come to. So I know you've done quite a lot of research on that, and maybe you could touch on that.
Thanks very much, Nude, and thanks for addressing the issues. Town Hamlets Council, as you know, has invested in burial land at Kenmore Park. They've bought 3 acres of land, which gives them approximately 2,500 grave spaces.
Are they doing any burials in Town Hamlets? Are they doing any
They
burials?
do no burial in Town Hamlets at all. Town Hamlets Cemetery Park is a beacon of what can be achieved with nature reserves when you establish, with the help of good working friends groups, local businesses and so on, a management strategy that can generate revenue, provide employment and training, can maintain existing jobs for the existing workers in those cemeteries, and can increase jobs for local people in those cemeteries as well. So that is a vision that Southwark has not really addressed. The opportunity to turn to look to the future of what these cemeteries could be. Town Hamlets Cemetery Park has invested in multi-faith burial ground at Kenmore Park. The Diocese of Southwark has also erected the monument to the unknown Southwark parishioner at Kenmore Park. So it seems a natural step for Southwark to move there. As you say, it's closer to Southwark than it is to Town Hamlets. It's 12 miles from Town Hamlets. It's only 5 miles from Southwark. And in fact, if you're in the north of the borough, it's irrelevant, because Nunhead or Chislehurst is the same distance, and it's public transport. Other councils, so Croydon Council is looking also at investing there, and other councils, they're in communication with 2 or 3 other councils also.
That's
because it's a common situation. But taking green space and woodland in inner city London in Zone 2, that's not on in a future that is going to face climate change.
Tom.
Thank you.
On consultation, so I mean, I chair housing scrutiny for the council, so I do see sometimes some examples of consultations that weren't as wide as they could have been, or weren't as effective as they couldn't be. And you know, I'm just wondering, what your opinions are, how we could gauge actual public opinion in the area. I mean, I like to use a benchmark figure for petitions. I don't like petitions. I think petitions can be loaded. Petitions can be they don't tell me much overall. I mean, a good example is 5,000 people in Southwark signed a petition to reinstate Jeremy Clarkson to the BBC. You know, so that's a large number of people signing a ridiculous petition.
Sure, and that was just something, whatever. This petition is where people haven't had an option to put their voice in any other way.
No. Can you let me finish, please? Yeah. So you know, petition is one way of showing an indication of public opinion, but how could Southwark work with you to come up with something that genuinely showed the level of interest and passion about this in the area? Because I don't think that's a petition. I don't think it's certain types of consultation, but I'd like to hear what that would look like to you. I mean, obviously there's a planning process coming up, which means that you're going to get the chance to object to those specifics, but what could Southwark have done, and what could we still do in order to be sitting here with real evidence of that opinion?
carry out a proper public consultation.
But
We are,
what is
excuse me,
that?
excuse
What
me,
is
I'm
that?
just going to say, we are actually in the public consultation period for the planning applications. You have no idea how close to the wire you are of passing something which is contravening all these policies and leaving yourselves vulnerable to risk as a council. Okay? What we would propose for public consultation is carry it out via the guidance provided by the government on a proper consultation. The 2011 consultation did not meet government guidance on due diligence around public consultation, I'm afraid. And we have encountered, I know a petition is not a consultation, we all know that, okay? But we have been...
You do tell us a lot about it, so...
But we've been out weekend after weekend, street fairs and all the rest of it. The people that we talk to in detail, and they tell us the same thing. It's a no-brainer. Woods are really important to them, to their children, to the health and quality of the neighbourhood, and in general, as a just a no-brainer. Now, a consultation that wants to look at a burial strategy must say what is being proposed. If people are supposed to choose, what choice have you offered them about whether you want to keep woods or you want to be buried? Do you want to have a tree cut down to be buried? Have you asked those faith communities that you say you're representing? Have you asked them how important woodlands are to them? Have you asked them whether their children want to visit them in forest schools like some schools do, and that schools go and take their kids there, or after school? You have to carry out a consultation, a public formal consultation.
Okay, I've got Martin and then Rosie, and then I'm going to draw these questions to a close, and then we're going to have the cabinet member and officers come forward and answer some questions as well. So, Martin.
If I may, Chair, just to make sure I've understood what the last speaker just said in regards to the plan application, the fact it's currently out to consultation and this meeting, they want to be sure that there isn't an overlap or any potential...
Well, that's what we checked at the start.
Right. I would be absolutely clear that is indeed the case. Right. So you accept that as no. Fine. That's good. My second question in that case, and if I may, clearly I've handled meetings like this as well, and I find very often that when individuals have very strong positions, very firm positions, there is no compromise, but I wouldn't see there is potential compromise with yourself. You said that you are anti knocking down any trees. You want to preserve all trees, regardless of their age or stature, yes?
No, there's always a health and safety issue, but that's it.
Good. Right. Therefore, if a 20-year-old tree exists on a plot of land which was never intended to be woodland, and of course I'm unaware of woodlands in Southwark, but I won't go further than that. Can I just be quite clear then? Are you suggesting, therefore, that despite the fact that the council has a cemetery strategy, which might require a tree or two will be felled or potentially moved, would you accept that a tree could be moved, or are you stating that this tree must stay where it is, regardless of the need for us to meet our corporate obligations in this regards to our corporate application to ensure that people are buried, or at the very least...
Can I answer that question? I mean, just number one is you do not have a corporate obligation. There's a policy which can be changed. You have no obligation to provide burial space.
Nevertheless.
Okay, okay, that's not enough. That's a big point. Secondly, this question: what's under that tree? Are they the graves of your descendants, of your not descendants?
But what my question?
Okay.
My question was: are you prepared? Again, are you prepared? I'll be quite clear. Are you prepared to accept a situation in which a tree might be moved in order for us? It has happened, if I may. If I may, my ward is part of a regeneration program right now.
Martin, I get any compromise on cutting down or moving trees outside of the health and safety.
I see. So there is no compromise. So the question is.
Well, I'm trying to get to the question.
Okay. So again, I will restate the question. Would you accept a compromise where the council says, okay, we recognise the value of this tree and we wish to move it from location A to location B, so the tree, and we will ensure the tree survives that move? Would you accept that as a suitable compromise?
It's unfortunately the level of detail at which you're talking is not relevant to the burial strategy. What you're talking about is whether we, as a campaign group for a burial strategy, have view on individual trees. We do not. Our points have been made in our presentation, and I'm afraid, in terms of these cemeteries, we are in favour that the council avoids risk by readdressing itself to its initial issues and problems with the consultation, with the financial implications.
Okay, we got the answer to that. So, Rosie.
It's a non-question.
It's very much a relevant question.
It's not for me to
Rosie,
say.
I'm moving on to
I'll
Rosie's
keep
question.
very straight to the point, but thank you to you and to the previous group for coming along and addressing us this evening and everything you've done to bring this campaign to our attention. I wanted to ask specifically, in your presentation you obviously mentioned lots of ways in which you feel like the kind of consultation, the investigation behind the strategy hasn't been adequate. But specifically, you mentioned there's been very limited ecological assessment, and I just wondered if you might be able to go into a bit more detail for me on, well, I suppose in what way it was limited, the things that were included, the things that weren't that you might have expected, that sort of thing.
So I think the council's tried to make a big deal about increasing biodiversity. I think at one point Darren Merrill said we want to make these the most biodiverse cemeteries in London. Okay. They're already biodiverse, okay? These are grade 1 sink woodlands. You don't go taking down trees. I know they'll say it's all about coppicing and so on. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. That is post-justification of the need to go and dig up woodlands for burial. That's all that is. So if we have to if the London Wildlife Trust has been brought in because the council has said this is our strategy, how should we do it best? What would be the best thing for nature if that's what we were going to do? What we're saying is that you shouldn't do it because these are biodiverse grade 1 sink woodlands, including Area Z. It is not overgrown in the sense that any place is overgrown.
Because we're coming up to 10 o'clock, so we need to push on.
Okay, so there also has not been a Cabot assessment, as stated before, okay? So there's been no assessment of ecological value in terms of what the environment gives back to Southwark in benefits each year. There are trees missing on the plans. Hundreds of trees are missing from the plans. Okay, you are leaving yourself.
Okay,
so
final question from Paul, and then we're going to move on to the cabinet member.
So it's a very quick question. Bearing in mind that, as you've stated yourselves, we have no obligation to provide burial at all within the borough, and that you believe it is so, it is self-evident that this is a very bad thing for the local community in London at large and so on. Why do you think that the council is doing it?
How many times have we had that?
Because what I don't understand is if the assertion is that the council is so incompetent and disingenuous, and indeed is wasting money, and you know, why do you think that the council is proposing? I mean, I who am relatively supportive of it in a general sense, have a belief that it's about providing accessible, affordable burial space relatively close to people within the borough, and that is a good thing to do. But you seem to believe that is somewhat disingenuous. Why do you believe the council is doing it?
No, I don't think. I would never ever accuse a council of being disingenuous. It's made up of so many people doing so many different things. I think there's been a miscommunication with the community. There hasn't been a public consultation. The council has decided what it thinks is the best thing to do and has tried to get it in over last Christmas, and now they're bringing it into the next stage now. I think the reason that the council is wanting to provide burial will support some faiths in the community, but it will not support other faiths. And there may be local people lobbying, local councillors like Gavin, like Vicky, like Renata. These are our cemeteries. Our families are buried here. We should continue to be buried here. We don't care what other people need these woods for, or you know, don't worry about asking other people. Just you know, provide for us. If that's the case, you don't know. I don't know. I can't say.
Okay.
Only the council could really say. And if you had a public consultation,
you're
would be able
moving quite
to
a long way away from the question there, Blanche. So I'm going to call this part of the session to a close. Ask you to take your seats, and then ask the cabinet member and officers to come forward and answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Welcome, Darren. We don't need you to reintroduce yourself, and Deborah neither. But if you'd like to, just introduce yourself.
I'm Rebecca Towers, Parks and Open Spaces Manager.
Thank you.
I'm Area Medical Services Manager.
Okay.
Strategy. I'm Rishi Morton,
research.
Thank you. Right. Well, thank you all for coming along this evening, and thank you for your patience. I know this is a late session. It's unfortunately the result of us having some big issues to look into this evening. So it would be good if we got your contribution to this. What I would ask you to do is to, if possible, address some of the points that were raised just now. I think it would be, obviously we can come back in with questions that anything's missed. So don't worry if you think there's something that's missed. But come back us on. So assume we know generally what the council's strategy is, and that we have we're all familiar with the area. We've all been there. We've all visited it. But come back on some of those key issues that have just been raised.
Yeah, I can come back on a few key issues, and I'll bring in officers
sure,
that have
that's
the
fine.
expertise to generally come in as well. The first thing I want to sort of say is where the first thing that Southwark was brought up, which is policies.
Yeah.
We all know some policies cross each other and don't quite adapt. But what I want to bring up to you is the London planning policy 7.68 burial spaces. It basically goes, some burials have either run out of or about to run out of burial space. For inner and central London boroughs, this means required provision in outer London or beyond. And this can cause serious problems in access and cost. This tends to be disproportionate effects on London's poorest communities. To ensure it is retained as a choice for London, boroughs should continue to make provision. The reuse of graves can provide some additional capacity. So that's a policy within the London plan that actually clearly states that it's not just us saying that having out of borough burials is disproportionate to poor, to some of our communities here. Is also within a London plan policy as well. So I just want to make that clear that there is crossovers with any policy, and if you want to have a look at policy in isolation, you could most probably make it fit to your. Is
that what you just did?
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So point taken. Now, just on they're going on the what's the costing of it, and I'm going to bring in Rebecca in a minute to go into more detail on the costing. The £5.2 million is part of a whole strategy. So it's part of cremators, renewing our cremators, doing up the pathways, toilet block, we've just put in toilet block, doing up the office. It's whole part of a strategy to bring our cemeteries up to a decent standing of proper use. I am quite willing to admit that our cemeteries over the years have not been managed properly. That's why we've got the problem with Area Z. We need to bring our cemetery, and remember this is a cemetery, up to proper use. But with that in consideration of it being a cemetery, I have also taken into account the views of the stakeholders and say Southwark. I have taken on their views and I have listened to them. And we have sort of like cut back on the amount of space we're going to use in areas, and so it is only the contaminated area that's there. So that's the area of burial space we're going to use. And then we're going to improve and enhance the area around it. On the portion of pathways, and I think Paul might come into this, but we're designing the pathways so they mirror existing pathways that were underneath there. So there were pathways and that there.
Yeah.
Now, I'm willing to listen to the stakeholder group, and actually Tom, who's in the stakeholder, brought up one question that hasn't come up about vehicles using the cemetery, which. That's why I want to have a stakeholder group. That's why I want to have a friends accountable. So in the long term, the management of the cemetery can be done on a consensual basis with residents that are around there. Yeah. That's the point that I want to get to. And also the other point, which I'm going to just bring up, the money we're spending brings in a sustainable burial strategy. So the point is, £5.2 million brings in a sustainable burial strategy that means that there's burial provision for the foreseeable future for our residents.
And on the costings.
Well, look, come on. We've had one session where Darren wasn't chipping in from the sidelines when you were speaking, so now I'd ask that the same courtesy was given to Darren and the officer.
So I'm going to be quiet now, because I know you most probably have a hell of a lot of questions to ask, and I've got all the experts here that can answer them for you in more detail than I can in some cases.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing, which is that
there are things that that we have. There are an awful lot that you've been presented to. Quite a lot of it we wouldn't necessarily agree with the facts. Some of it is obviously opinion. Some of it we've got made different assessments. The officers will try to cover off everything, but I'm conscious that it's very late. So if we find ourselves in a position where there are some questions that you've had where we haven't answered off, I'm very happy to provide something in writing for the committee if you want that at a later stage, because I'm worried we may not manage to deal with absolutely every single point and explain what the true position is. Having said that, I'm not going to say any more because we've got a range of people here who have got the detail who can deal with all of that.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think everybody in the room, unfortunately, the one thing that unites us all is that we're all going to be here very late tonight. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of things. So we're going to move now to questions. So I've got David first, then Rosie, then Tom and Jasmine.
Sure. I think the first point to make is that I hear what Jasmine says, but when she says that everyone has the right to be buried in the borough, actually, practically, obviously, that we don't. Well, I'd argue that we don't all have the right to be buried in the borough because we actually couldn't bury us all in the borough, and also our current strategy, of course, doesn't allow for Muslims and Orthodox Jews and other groups to be buried. Well, it's part of the pointing out that actually where we're at, I think, that we basically have a flawed strategy. The other point I think that, and this is where I'm seeking responses from the council, is that if you actually read the consultation, it's not clear. A number of things you wouldn't realise from the strategy that we're now adopting. So you wouldn't realise that 52% of people responded say did not consider it important for Southwark Council to continue to provide burial space. You wouldn't realise that the top reason for respondents visiting the cemeteries was for recreation at 65%. You wouldn't perhaps appreciate that of the 942 responses, there were only 26 from SE1 and SE16, and only 27 from SE17 and SE5, the middle of the borough. So the north and the middle of the borough, we've only got 53 responses. The majority of responses, again, 63%, were from Lewisham. But actually, this is about Southwark residents, supposedly, and whether Southwark residents want or believe there should be a continuation of the burial. The original consultation, of course, didn't lay out other options. There was no other option about actually.
David, we've got to get to a question.
Members are allowed to talk a bit.
Yes, but this is a speech, not a question. Well, no, ask a question.
Well, because the question is, the consultation in so many ways is flawed. It doesn't actually provide any burial space for Muslims or for Orthodox Jews. So actually, we're talking about a strategy that doesn't meet equality standards, I would argue. So on that grounds, why did you think it not necessary to do what I think most reasonable people would expect us to do, which was to reopen the consultation? Let's put down the options. Let's lay out whether we should continue to bury people in the borough, or whether actually we should allow people to be buried outside the borough, or whether and preserve these things. I mean, why not go back to the public and actually really get a proper consultation that gives us a proper response?
I'll let Deborah.
I'm going to start. Both Darren and I joined this particular thing after 2011. When we did try to do a full public consultation, and I'll ask Rebecca to come in on that. To answer the end part of your question, though, we are in a position of urgency. We need to do not just additional burial, we need to do reuse as well. It's not either or. We need to be able to do both to do a sustainable burial strategy. But we need to get on with it, because if we do not do something quickly, we will actually run out of burial space sometime in 2017 on our current predictions. So yes, the burial strategy as a whole is a big overarching strategy, and underneath it there are detailed elements as you go through. I mean, it goes to 2040.
Yes, it does.
It goes to 2040, so you wouldn't expect the fine detail of absolutely everything to be dealt with at 2040. And that's why it was important to, as you come up with each individual element, clearly there's statutory consultation through planning, but also to pick up detailed consultation around those particular individual elements as well. And we will continue to be doing that as we go through each element. So at the moment, there's a planning application in relation to Area D1 and Area Z. There will be more consultation coming through, not just through the stakeholder group, but widely as we go through each
Deborah,
area.
can I just come in there and just ask you about an element of that, which is that if sites D1, Z, and B were redeveloped for burial, which I personally think is a legitimate thing to do. That would develop 1,745 new burial plots. And surely that would give us time then to get into the detail of developing reuse of graves, and that would give us the breathing. That just those sites would give us the breathing space that we needed.
I mean, I think I might have then misunderstood Councillor Noakes' question, because I thought he was asking to stop everything and wait until we consulted.
Well,
I think there is a separate issue, which is actually dealing with the urgent and then looking at and how quickly we can...
But let me bring it back. D1, Z and B gives us 1,745. Does that give us the space to then start looking at reuse of graves in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, we already had in the strategy some reuse areas for, within 5 years. So even if we brought those forward, obviously we'd be in a better position then. So we actually...
So the time frame for developing proposals for the reuse of graves on Camberwell New is 5 years. It's going to take us 5 years to get there.
It won't take us that long, but I'm just saying that's what it said in the strategy anyway, that we'd start to bring things online for reuse. I think Tom doesn't feel like we're responding in the way he'd like, but believe me, behind the scenes we're beavering away in a frenzied kind of fashion, doing the age profiling, looking at the plans and maps, because in the absence of a computerised system... Because
for me, this is the element of it that unlocks this and gets us through, because if you look at sites like JK and L, if you Honorate Rec, which has already been mentioned, then and the land between H1 and Z as well, right? If you look at they are more widely used by local people than any of the other areas. They're the ones people make. When we talk to people, as I say, I'm a local councillor, knock on a lot of doors around that area, talk to a lot of people. They're the ones that people are concerned about. Despite what we've heard tonight, I think site Z is not held in the same high regard, and so I think we really do need to get on with that. I'd like us to make a recommendation about that tonight. I apologise to David because I did slightly cut across his question. So
my only follow-on question, I suppose, to what Deborah said. I mean, my concern is about when you talk about the urgency of making this decision. But if we proceed with a flawed consultation and a flawed strategy, and then that's legally challenged, we might, to be honest with you, it might be much better to go back and reconsult within 6 months and get a really proper response, which absolutely confirms.
Are we going to get legally challenged?
Well, I don't think so, but your legal officer is over there. I mean, the strategy was a decision that was taken in 2011, 2012. That strategy has never been challenged. I think we might be slightly out of time to judicially review it now. So the strategy itself is not subject to judicial review at this stage. Where we're going with the specific proposals is clearly to Planning Committee, and Planning Committee will need to take a view. They'll need to take legal advice. Some questions have been raised today about whether or not we have provided everything we need for Planning Committee. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to answer questions like that here. If I am, I would say that we clearly take pre-planning advice, so we provide everything that we are told by the planning officers we need to provide for those planning applications. And if the Planning Committee gets the decision wrong, it's not my decision, we will put our planning application forward. If the Planning Committee refuses our planning application, that's a big problem for us. Okay. But we think we've put forward all the things that we need to do for Planning Committee.
Rosie, I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there. I'm sorry, David. No, Well, I'll come back to you later, Rosie.
Well, I suppose first of all, I'd share David's concerns that there doesn't seem to be hasn't been clearly in the past, and there doesn't seem to be in the immediate future any give from you about whether you're going to go back to the community and have a proper consultation, even though clearly so many, I suppose, very strong feelings have been expressed. And I think that's really a shame. I mean, obviously, you mentioned that there might be some further consultation, but that will obviously be when the plans are already in train. So there'll, by definition, be limited ability for the community to influence them, I would imagine, regardless of what the outcomes that kind of consultation might be, and I'd question what kind of consultation that is then and what the work is of it. But my question is, I suppose it's also about taking a step back, but it's actually about the environmental and ecological assessment. I mean, you know, we've heard a lot about how lacking the strategy is in dealing with this issue, lack of detail about the number of trees at the site, for instance, and lack of assessment of, I suppose, the biodiversity and the environmental value, I suppose, of the site. And so, again, I suppose I'd like to say, or I'd like to ask whether you have any plans, you know, in light of everything that's been brought to light by the campaign groups and all of the work and the research that they've done, that they've brought here and told us about, and told us about, throughout their campaign, whether you have any plans to go back and carry out further assessments before you press ahead with this.
I just wanted to start by saying that, I'm sure the committee knows this, but we're not looking to fell 10 acres of woodland. The sites that we're talking about are the burial areas in areas D1 and Z are under 1 acre in total of land that is not all wooded, for example. So we don't know where 10 acres is coming from. There are trees,
hang on.
that will need to be felled in the making of these burial sites. There is no doubt about that. There is a small number as we could possibly make it and still create burial space for local people. We're talking about 25 trees, 18 trees, so 18 in area Z and 25 in area D1. You've got the images in front of you and you can see that we're looking at enhancements to sites here. Now I know that that's we've got different opinions about that and what is an enhancement to a site, but we have been asking our experts about what constitutes an enhancement to a site. So we've got 2 sinks here, sites of importance important for nature conservation. There were sinks before, there'll be sinks in the future. They're sinks because they're already buried in, but they're still sinks. They're not sinks because of any grade 1 woodland. We're talking about secondary self-seeded woodland, and that's really important.
Right, okay, that's interesting.
And also our colleagues in London Wildlife Trust, our independent consultants, have told us that if their recommendations are taken through on Area Z, then they would expect to see a net increase in biodiversity in 2 to 3 years' time. So
it would increase biodiversity.
Increase biodiversity on Area Z alone.
So we have to kind
right,
of
okay.
So all of the surveys that are required on ecology have been done, and they have been done ad nauseum. I mean, we're surveying here. So when people say that we don't listen to the people who don't, who seem to not agree with us, it isn't true. It's hard to listen to us because there's quite a deluge of information coming through, but we're doing our very best to respond to people's concerns. And as such, we've changed the plans on Area Z and Area D1 considerably to take into account people's concerns. And, I understand what people value about these sites. I really, really do. But I believe they're going to be improved as a result of it. Now, I know that's not the strategy. The strategy is about local burials for local people. That's what it's about. 52% of people said that they didn't support burial in the borough, but 48% of people did who responded. And that's 48% of people when only 22% of people said they opted for burial. So it's a small amount.
From
actually,
Lewisham.
people were supporting the fact
Okay.
that we need burial in the
Tom.
borough.
I lived in Lewisham though.
Tom.
Sorry, Chair, can I just go back?
No, I'm sorry, don't. Tom.
I just want to clarify a few more of the figures. I asked the last group about those, and so I wanted to then ask you. They said 10 years, you said foreseeable future. I'd like to know what your definition of foreseeable future is in years, or approximate. They said 5.2, you said half that 5.2 is for the toilet block, the crematorium, etc. So what's the cost on these proposals? And final point, trees missing from plans was something they brought up. I don't know enough about plans to know whether that's something you do normally. Could you clarify whether there are trees missing, if so what?
Yeah, on the trees, legal record.
There are trees missing, but the trees that are missing are young still-set saplings that, under the British Standard Survey, don't actually merit a survey. The British Standard states that any tree under 75 mm at height of 1.5 in wooded or large group of areas shouldn't be inclusive of a survey, and that it would only be expected that trees above 150 mm would be surveyed. Yes, I was going to say, and they are, because you've got obviously large tree groups and wooded areas, it's almost impossible to pick out every single tree for that purpose, where in terms of the British Standard 587 survey, it doesn't pose as a relevant part of the survey.
But let's be honest.
Hey, okay, look, Lewis, I'm going to have to ask you.
We follow best practice.
Lewis, you need to sit down. Okay.
We follow best practice and British
couldn't see the forest.
Okay. Okay, look, you're going to have to let the cabinet member and officers answer the questions. We won't get anywhere if people are just shouting from the sidelines.
Well, I was going to say, but we do recognise that this area has some sensitivities, and that's why we've gone above and beyond to make sure whatever we do around the edges and that will meet and improve ecology. We know that's what people want, and that's what we're trying to do. On your pricing figures, I will just ask Rebecca to go through those.
So 5.2 million consists of £410,000 that was given in 2011 for emergency burial space creation, and that's been spent. So 2012 we were given 4.7 million to create to deliver the burial strategy, and we're still working on that. And there are infrastructure improvements that go with that, obviously because of the need to have a toilet provision in Old Cemetery when there'll be people coming in for funerals. But we still believe that we can deliver the strategy and with the costs that are noted within it to a greater or lesser degree. Obviously we've got to wait for more firmed up costs as we go through and get contractors' prices, for example. But we've had a quantity surveyor go through, and that's how we came up with the prices that are in here, with some contingency. So, for example, one of the things that we've heard earlier, which isn't true, is that in the strategy it said that Z, I think we heard that it said that it was going to cost 250,000. It's actually 1.3. If you look for yourselves, it says 1.3 million pounds in there. So, we're still working to those figures to a greater or lesser degree. I'd just like to also say that we are delivering a sustainable burial strategy with the money that's been given to us, which is council capital, which is about investing in our assets, not about looking for a return on that capital. You know that better than I do. But this strategy is about us working towards 2040. We've got to work out what happens between 2040 and 2045. But then after that, the idea is that we have a cycle of reuse which takes us forward. If we buy space at Kemmer Park Cemetery, which is a private cemetery, we will be buying space with no end game, no sustainable strategy. So what we're doing is investing in our assets for the long term here, because these are important for people for burial, but yes, they are important for people for recreation.
Can I just jump in on site H1, which is the site at the top in Campbell Old that backs onto Rydale. And this has been raised with us by a number of local people, because though that is one part where people's homes, their back gardens, and they're quite tight back gardens, back directly on to one of the sites. Now, my view is that site H1 should not be part of this. I think development on that area should be frozen, because I think that there is a particular concern about how tight that is, and because it's raised land as well, how tight that is to those back gardens. I mean, I think that's something we should be looking at. What do you think?
Well, you're right, because that's why Area Z come up, because when they did look at the burial strategy, did request that we put that as back as far as possible. Now, my own personal goal and opinion is if we can get the reuse strategy working quicker, but it does take a lot of work from the office.
So we maybe could challenge you tonight to remove that completely from the strategy.
Couldn't move it completely until we've done the research on the reuse. That's what we need to do, and that's what I'm getting officers to try and do. Once that research is done, and we know we can see it, it might be able to come off the table.
Okay.
But until we've done that research, I can't say.
Jasmine.
Okay. Just to put 3 points really, and that is maintaining the cemetery. That was my understanding when I first looked at this. The idea is that we were going to do this in a way which maintains biodiversity. So I'm just not clear now, so I'm just seeking assurances on that. The other question that I've got is the issue of the faith groups, because when I consulted Councillor Jamil Mohammed, from my own ward, he told me it wasn't a thing, literally. He was reassured that it wasn't the case, that faith groups would be excluded for the reasons cited. So I do want clarification on that tonight, if I may. And then my third point is the issue of it feels strange, to be talking about consultation now, because it feels like we've got more than enough material here to go with, really. I mean, the campaign's so massive, it's hard to think how many more people are left to talk to. So I just want to know, the stakeholder group, how are we going to go forward with this? Because this feels positive, that we have a stakeholder group, that there's this idea of co-working, and we've got this ready-made group to work with. But when you mention that, I look in the audience and they're shaking their heads like they don't have confidence it's going to happen. So
I'll put that question to you. On that last one, friends groups is what we need. Properly constituted friends of cemeteries. Anyway, answer those questions from Jasmine.
Properly constituted friends of Camberwell No is what I'm striving to do. So I'm working with some of the residents to try and get that in process. Right. We've offered them, we're given space to have meetings, we're helping with leaflet, printing, we've got the printer, we're helping as much as we possibly can. I would like that to happen, because that is the key for continuous residents' involvement in the cemeteries for the long term as well.
And it will include the people in the audience?
If they wish to come along, yes, they can come along.
But after 4 meetings, where was the consultation on anything that's gone into the planning application? Hasn't happened.
You didn't even tell them that you'd applied to the diocese, and then you apologised afterwards for not telling them. That is illegal.
Okay. Right. So I've got Johnson. Do you still want to ask your question?
No. Still making the policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, there were other questions from Jasmine. Yeah.
I was going to say that I remembered one of your questions, which was about multi-faith. So we did obviously do an equalities impact assessment that went with the strategy, and it's published. And we found out that actually not having burial space in the borough would have a detrimental effect on certain groups, including BME groups, elderly people, and people with disabilities. But equally, we did consult with the Southwark Muslim Forum, and they told us that, this is in the consultation report, that there are different interpretations of Sharia law on burial rights, and this is the same for other religions with different orthodoxy. But some people adhere to things strictly and others do not. But burial is absolutely necessary, and Muslims are choosing to be buried in our cemeteries, in our cemetery at Nunhead. And we
so it is happening?
Yes, it is happening. Not lots, but it is happening. And we can be looking at Area B with a view to creating a multi-faith area if that is something that is deemed to be appropriate. The Muslim Forum told us that there would be a serious equality impact if Southwark Council ceased its burial provisions. So they obviously support us having burial in the borough. So I am confused about this claim that we are not working with multi-faith groups. I mean, yes, we have an awful lot of Christian denominations and atheists buried in our cemeteries, because there are other reasons why people opt for burial.
Right, now we
a quick one also on that impact assessment. We also got to take an assessment of if you remove a service, the service we're providing. So the two go together as well.
Okay, so now we are I'll come back to that. We'll ask another question about that in a moment. I'm going to take a question from a nude, and then I think we need to start to move towards making some recommendations. I have some suggestions. I hope other members of the committee have as well. So, Anud, over to you.
Thank you. My bit of advice for Darren, if you want friends group, is you have to engage with people as equals and not decide before you speak to them that you know best. And that is the problem, and that's why you still need a consultation, because you've not asked the public the fundamental questions about burials versus trees and all the rest of it. And I think you're silly not to. And actually, I don't think it would take that long, and you might get some really good answers back, because I trust the public to know what's best for the place that they live in. My questions are particularly around the numbers of trees. We just heard a couple of numbers from Rebecca, which is really the first time I've heard them, because on your charts you talk about retaining some trees, removing several trees, retaining significant trees. And I'm really anxious about how vague it is. And certainly when I've wandered around the site, I can't see how you could dig up and reuse those graves without disturbing the trees. And I'm not sure it's very easy to remove mature trees. I'm concerned about how you define, and so what I'd like is the numbers of trees of all heights and shapes and sizes that will be lost as part of this burial strategy. I'd also like to know your response to Tom's suggestion in his paper, because I haven't heard that. And the final question was the point that the group raised about one trial pit out of 60 being contaminated, and I just wanted to get some clarification on that, please.
Okay. Can I just answer your comments on me
Engaging.
knowing best and go,
yeah.
I don't know best.
That's clear.
I am listening to everybody that's concerned. I don't expect that
But you're
everyone
not
else...
listening.
Let the Cabinet Member answer the questions that you've asked.
I have listened to the Friends Group. I've been up to the cemetery and spoke to people visiting there. I have listened to, anyone and anyone that wishes to talk to me.
And the three questions that...
Okay, so it was trees in
How
the
many?
strategy.
How many of
We
all?
can't answer that.
You can't answer
We
that.
can't answer that about tree loss in the strategy, because across the whole strategy, I mean, you've got Z and D1 there, and that's a different story. But across the entire strategy, it's difficult to say. We haven't worked with detail of each of the different areas, except for Z and D1, which you've got in front of you. I really couldn't tell you. I mean, we're seeking to preserve as many trees as possible.
You see, that's what makes me a bit anxious.
Okay, well, let's not continue a conversation about it. Maybe we could address that in the recommendations at the end.
Z is 18 trees, 18 mature trees that will have to go, and at D1 it's 23. But the group are not content with that, because those are the mature trees. So when we talk about the tiny little self-set seedling, we've not counted that, because for the reasons Gary's described, you just can't count them all. And they aren't classified as trees under the British standards.
So you don't know how many trees we're going to lose, is the answer to the first question.
We know how many mature trees we're going to lose at D1 and Z, but across the entire 2 cemeteries, we can't tell you that, because we haven't got the detail of the other areas.
Okay, the next question.
It was about Tom's plan.
Tom's suggestion.
Tom's reuse plan, we really are grateful for the hard work that Tom's put into that. He's identified one area that's got 28% of burials, or areas that plots could be reused. That's okay. It's not a lot of burials. When we're talking about an area, 28% could be one there, one there, one there, one there, one there. And at the moment, that is not a safe way to approach reuse. People in London are not doing reuse, other local authorities are not doing it like this, because you have to be so careful about the disturbance of human remains. If we want to be worried about challenge, that's the area we've got to worry about. That's the area to be scared of, touching and disturbing human remains, and not doing that in a planned way. And I think that is very risky.
And the toxicity in the pit, the one that there was a
would you just on that point? Tom said it's been misconstrued. But he said, would you actually have a proper chat with him afterwards?
It's not dotted around. We only included the graves in the sample that were accessible by a width of at least 2 graves in front. It's not dotted about.
Well, Tom, I think we can address this in the recommendations, because I think we hear you loud and clear on this point.
And
I think.
Believe me, we've had stakeholder groups, and Tom has brought this up every time, and we have had conversations about it, but what we've said each time is that we are not able to do this right now, because we need to do this in a planned way. We need the staff to be trained, we need protocols. I think the issue with us moving forward as a stakeholder group, frankly, is that we can't move beyond the rejection of the fact that we have to do D1 and Z, and then we can be thinking about...
Okay, the toxicity in the pits.
So the one trial pit out of 60 was done some time ago.
So that's true.
2011, and then we have done further investigations since. During that time, we've removed an unexploded object from the site at Z. So we know the site does need remediation, that it's a site of illegal
Sorry,
dumping.
Rebecca, my question is it true that 1 out of 60 was contaminated?
Up to that point, we found asbestos in 1 out of 60, but
Okay.
we have a site that requires remediation. Some of that site is toxic, unsafe to human health. And that is in the reports which are published online. They're on our website at the moment. So we need to do something because we've got 3 issues here. We've got health and safety in terms of possible harm to human health, but health and safety in terms of the site. It can't be accessed by the public safely because it's all bumpy and it's got massive dips and people can fall down. And we've got an issue with the Environment Agency who know we've got an illegal dumping site there and we have to do something about it. And whatever we do about that site will require clearance. Capping it. We can't cap over trees. We will need to do something. So what we're doing is making the best use of our existing cemetery land to create burial space.
Well, you could consult about what to do with it. Might be a better option.
What I'd like us to do is, in terms of discussion, possible recommendations from this committee tonight, given where we are, because I think that's the important thing. We need to make sure that we as a committee can make recommendations that make a real difference to the way that the process works here. Now, hands up, obviously I'm more deeply involved in this than I would otherwise be because I'm a ward councillor, so I know the area very well, and I've for some time had an idea of some recommendations we could make at this point, and everything that I've heard tonight has kind of confirmed some of that, and particularly the last comment you made, Rebecca, which I think was helpful. So can I read out 3 initial recommendations? I have more, but these are, I think, are the 3 most significant. And please let me go through them first, and then people just let me know what you think, because I think there is a real distinction between sites D1Z and B and the sites Honour Oak Rec H1 and J, K and L. So these would be my 3 initial recommendations. First, the OSC supports the development of D1Z and B, but frees all other development until a full report on reuse, and that's coming back to Tom's point, throughout both cemeteries is reviewed by Cabinet, ideally by January 2016. So I think we need to get a move on the reuse strategy. Second, the Honour Oak Rec, site H1 and the land between H1 and Z and sites J, K and L are removed from the strategy for all time and are maintained and improved as a recreation ground and play area in the case of Honour Oak Rec, as a meadow in the case of H1 and the land between H1 and Z, and as woodland in the case of sites J, K and L. And thirdly, that the use of site D1 be conditioned so that only small, this is in Camberwell New, that the use of site D1 be conditioned so that only small flat markers can be used and the area maintained as a meadow. Because anybody who knows that particular area knows that could be maintained as a meadow, but obviously that wouldn't be possible if we had upstanding. So I know that's only a starter. I have more, but if people would initially give me their opinions on those recommendations, and then of course we can open it up for other recommendations that might be suggested. Opinions.
Thanks, Gavin. I think it would be really, really important to have some sort of consultation on some of the fundamental questions that have never been consulted on, would be my first point. My second point is I wonder whether that first recommendation has to include stuff happening on D1, because I mean the council's own planning application calls it virgin land. It seems to me I wouldn't feel comfortable tonight with voting for something that went ahead with destroying virgin land in this way. So
it's not destroying virgin land. It's burying people in a cemetery.
I don't think it's possible to do that without destroying.
I mean, I was there. I looked at this particular piece of land just the other day, and it is, it would be absolutely completely uncontroversial to have burial there. I mean, it's in a cemetery. It's right in the middle.
I accept that, but it says in the council's own planning application, virgin land. It's not been used since 1927.
I think you're getting sidelined by that phrase.
I think it's important.
It's got 2 burials.
It's got 2 burials on it, so.
I don't.
Okay.
What number? Because your point is you're trying to get some breathing space.
Yeah, I'm trying to come to a
yeah,
compromise
no,
position on these sites. Yeah.
So does your breathing space need 3 sites, or could it not go with at least 2?
Well, apart from the fact that D1 is described as virgin land, which I don't see. I don't see the significance on D1.
I have with Z as well, but I suppose my point is, if you're trying to get some breathing space, do you need all 3? Because actually I think you should be having a proper consultation and therefore giving yourself as much space as possible.
Personally, I would prefer D1 to be in there because I think it would give us enough. That would then give us enough breathing space because that's going to give you, what was it, 1,700.
What are the figures for each?
Yeah.
Can we check?
Any other views on the recommendations read out?
Can I just see clarification? Can I just see clarification?
Yeah.
On the first one, you talked about for HJK and L. I think you asked for that for any reuse to be put on hold until January. Is that what you said?
No. So for the Honour Oak Rec, but this is the second one. So this is the one that contains JK and L. Is for Honour Oak Rec, H1, and the land between H1 and Z, and sites JK and L are removed from the strategy for all time. So they will not be included as part of this burial strategy. That would be my recommendation. Because I think they're significantly different in character, and I genuinely don't think that D1 falls into that category.
I think it's woodland, but can we get a clarification on the figures? It's on the map. There.
I was just going to ask
Tom.
which letter Honour Oak Rec is. Is that the A, B?
Yeah, it hasn't really got.
It's already been.
Oh, is it the back? Right at the back.
Yeah, I'm just trying to belt and braces, David. I'm trying to make it that it never, henceforth and never. Are people comfortable continuing to call it Honour Oak Rec?
Yeah.
Most people would.
Please.
Yeah.
Can I get the numbers on each? The D1, the B, and the Z. How many we're talking about on each?
So if D1, Z, and B were included, bear with me. I've got that number.
How many graves?
1,734.
In total. How many on each, please?
D1 is 145, Z is 700, and at the moment B is 1,000, but B hasn't got a detailed design, so we need to do all the proper investigations.
So D1 as a percentage is small.
Tiny.
It is, but...
It is, but a word of caution, D1 within the plans of what comes on stage, D1 actually comes before Z because of the amount of work Z needs. So there's a word of caution that could actually put us in a position that we can't provide burial space to include that.
It's nearly a year's worth.
And you're going to cut down the trees.
Well, we'll come to the roadways. We haven't finished. We're going to come to the roadways.
Will we get a chance at the end to make a statement? Like the others?
If you want to, yes.
Well, we do.
Yeah. Well, if you want to, then you can. Can I get? I think I would like to put these 3 recommendations to the committee.
So Chair, can I?
Yeah.
In view of what the cabinet member just said in relation to D1, I'm inclined to accept what he says has been an accurate assessment of the situation. That if we were included, it would delay implementation by a year or so.
And remember, my 3rd recommendation says that the use of site D1 be conditioned so that only small flat markers can be used and the area is maintained as a meadow. So there is some recognition of that, slightly different in character as part of that pool.
Can I just ask what's the intention of the phrase for all time? I mean, are we talking about the duration of this strategy? Because I'd say I have a slight reticence if it is genuinely, in a term. Because I'm not quite sure whether that's it.
I'm comfortable with taking out the phrase for all, as long as we remove it from the strategy. I was perhaps overreaching myself.
Yes,
in seeking
your
to.
omnipotence is not there.
Yes, indeed.
Future generations.
Okay, I'm.
Particular site.
Deborah, after Deborah's contribution, I'm going to put these 3 recommendations to the committee.
Chair, it's absolutely up to you,
yes.
Of course, whether you want to have any officer advice on any of those recommendations from us.
Yeah.
We're willing to give it to you, but if you don't want it, we're also willing to just leave it. just on the D1, as you can see from the plans, that is our intention to have that area developed in that way. We have actually we are going out, as I said, we're doing lots of consultations. We are going to consult on a memorialisation for funeral directors, because we want to know what things people want when they're buried. It's all very well having cemeteries that are very beautiful, but we actually need to provide what people need and want for burial. So it would be difficult for us not to include everything in our memorialisation strategy. That's obviously a preferred option. I just would mention that.
I think it's an important element of it.
I would also mention that, of course, until we've done the reuse strategy, we won't know how many graves that will develop and how quickly. And therefore we might have to advise the Cabinet that we would be at risk in accepting something that took very large areas out of the burial strategy, absolutely, before we knew what we had got when we've done the work on the reuse strategy.
Yeah, I'm going to stick to my guns on this one. I think I hear what you're saying, Deborah. I'm not dismissing it, out of hand, but I think it's right for the committee to put this challenge back. Last one, Eleanor, and then we're going to go to a vote.
I would just like to hear from Norman in terms of, we've heard a lot about legal risk and things like that, so where are the points? If we make a decision now, could someone bring judicial review against this, or would that be later on, just planning?
On the original consultation, I think the director is quite right. It's gone far beyond judicial review because of the time lapse. There are live planning applications, and judicial reviews could take place there. I've not seen any of the details. I don't know what the level of risk is there. I can't see that any decision we make here is subject to judicial review, because it's overviewing scrutiny. We're not actually making a decision, we're just making recommendations.
Can I ask, Chair, that we vote on each recommendation?
Yes, fair enough.
Thank
fair
you.
enough. Okay. Given that
and table one about consultation.
Given that there was most controversy over the first, why don't I take the second two first? So the second recommendation. Do I need to read it out again?
Yes,
yeah.
please.
Okay. Right. That Honour Oak Rec, Site H1 and the land between H1 and Z, and sites J, K and L are removed from the strategy and are maintained and improved as a recreation ground and play area in the case of Honour Oak Rec, a meadow in the case of H1 and the land between H1 and Z, and a woodland in the case of sites J, K and L. Can we have a... Can we have... No, you can't. No. Can I have a vote on that?
Yeah.
Is this after you?
Oh, that's unbelievable.
Oh, wait, you're not going to let us speak?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not going to let you speak, because we're now discussing the recommendations of the
This is
committee.
only on that one recommendation. We're going to consider them all separately.
So the second.
I abstained, Chair.
You abstained. Okay, fair enough. The third that I made originally, but the second that we're voting on, is that the use of Site D1 be conditioned so that only a small